Hi everyone, welcome to the True Mouse Games YouTube channel and welcome to another episode of GM Musings, where I talk about different RPG related topics, especially those who are of greater concern to a game master like me. Today I would like to talk to you about the two styles of gaming, or the two styles of adventuring I should say. We have railroading on one side and sandbox on the other side. Now let's start with some definitions. What is actually railroading and what is sandbox? A lot of people use those two terms to describe a lot of different things, and I think most people aren't actually aware of what they specifically signify. Now, railroad basically means there is a predetermined storyline which is mostly linear, just like railroad tracks. And all the quests on these railroad tracks, because they are on the same railroad tracks, they are linearly connected. So the players often literally need to get from point A to point B to point C to point D. And often this progress can occur scene by scene, and the scenes might be prepared in quite great detail by some game masters. In its most extreme, in railroading games, things happen, and by that I mean the plot progresses, no matter what the player characters do, well, except for when they die, I guess, then the plot ends with them. Now, sandboxing, on the other side, does not have a specific prescribed storyline. The players can wander around an area of the world at will. And that area can be small, it can be large. It can be a single village and its surrounding area, the few problems that the farmers, the blacksmith, and whoever not in this area might face. Or it can be as large as an entire continent with multiple realms, even larger than that if the players and the game master are up for it. The most important thing about sandboxing is that there is a large freedom of player choice. The dots of the different quests are not connected, at least not connected beforehand. The choices that the players make, which quests to take and which quests to succeed in, which quests they might fail, which faction they side with, those choices connect the dots, and they can connect them in very different ways that are often unforeseeable even for a game master. What is very important to notice about sandboxes and railroads is that they are both tools. They are tools for a game master to use, tools in a game master's toolkit. And every game master, every good game master, should be able to use both railroads and sandboxes, and he should know when to use which of these tools. In the end, it comes down to one thing: player expectations, which means what kind of game do the players want to play? Well, I guess also game master expectations. What kind of game do you want to run? Now let's look at railroads and sandboxes in a little more detail. Now, railroads, a lot of people say they're bad. If you use them, you're a bad game master. Railroading is boring, it can never be interesting. That's certainly not true. Many video games are railroaded, and people do tend to enjoy those. It's, again, all about player expectations. You go into a video game with a different expectation than you would into a role-playing game. Some people go in with a very similar expectation. They might have a lot of fun with railroaded games. Even some of the very well-known stories of the fantasy universe, or universes, are railroaded. Think of Lord of the Rings, for instance, to just pick one prominent example. The whole world of Lord of the Rings is literally a group of people going from the Shire to Bree, through the Mines of Moria, to Lothlorien, and so on, until they get to Mordor, where they destroy the ring. So it is point A to point B to point C to point D. And they pick up people along the way, but that does not make it any less railroaded. I mean, the one time they actually do not want to go through the Mines of Moria, they start to climb up the mountains over the Caradhras Pass. A snowstorm blocks their way and forces them to turn around, go into the mines, face the goblins, meet the Balrog, which is clearly a scene that has been intensively prepared by a game master, and the snow on the Caradhras is, if that's not a tool a game master uses to push his group gently back towards the railroad, I don't know what it is. Anyway, as I said, this doesn't mean railroading is automatically bad. Often it leads to a more interesting climax of an adventure because you don't have many, some people might feel to be distracting side quests, and the climax is easier to reach and might be more satisfactory to many players. Railroading is especially good for new players because it involves more leading. The game master basically leads the players from one scene to the next, and it doesn't involve that much overwhelming option, and especially new players might struggle with that. Railroads are also very good if there's time constraints. Maybe you only have 3 hours to play and you have this specific story idea that you would like to see, but if you go a sandbox campaign, or a sandbox adventure, your characters, the players, might get sidetracked easily and you might not be able to get to that conclusion. So that is a reason to choose railroads. It's also running a game, a railroaded game. It is much less effort for players and player characters in general. And again, we come to player expectation. What do players expect from the game? Some players just want to have a relaxing game, kill some monsters, get some loot. There's nothing wrong with that. And maybe they do not want all those confusing options. Maybe they do not want to make choices. They might be exhausted, and they might look for a simpler experience. Railroading gives you that. It's a perfectly valuable reason to use that. Now, I found a metaphor that another game master, a blog writer, has used to describe railroad campaigns or railroad adventures in general. I would like to share it here because I found it very fitting. He says that a good railroad experience can be, funnily enough, like an amusement park. So you come to the amusement park, you see all these amazing rides, all these great attractions, and you think you can visit them in any order you choose, skip a few, and so on and so on. You think you're completely free in these choices. But in truth, there is obviously a intelligence behind designing a park, a theme park, an amusement park. The people designing such a park and running it know very well how to regulate the flow of customers and how to attract attention to specific attractions that they want people to visit more and than others. And that is exactly what a good railroad can be like. People might not even realize that they are in a railroad. Again, as I said, it comes down to player expectation. What do they want? Now, the sandbox is quite a different experience, and it can have two major problems. The first one is it requires a lot of effort from the game master to prepare, because the game master has to prepare a lot of stuff to make a world seem living, to make a sandbox seem large. The second problem is it can lead to passive, and by passive I mean boring, campaigns due to a phenomenon that's called the option paralysis in psychology. Basically, what that means is if there's too many options to choose from, the human brain might become paralyzed. Players might not know what to do. They might not know what the game master expects them to do, and they might think that the game master expects them to follow specific quests. They might not know what to do. They might just shut down and they might just wander around aimlessly, not leading to any interesting experiences. And then in the end, they might say, well, that was a very boring campaign. And you don't want that to happen in your sandbox campaign. Now, how do you avoid that? It's actually not too hard if you think about it a little. You avoid that by engaging your players. Now, how do you engage your players? You show them story hooks. Don't throw them at them. Don't force them down their throat. If they want some space in their game, if they want to just wander around a little, relax a little, maybe do some stuff that's connected to their background without you having to throw a hook at them first, let them do it. But if you get the impression that they're getting bored with the game, be ready. Have story hooks ready. There's two very simple ways that I often use to throw story hooks at the players. The first one is very blatant. Have a job board, a notice board. The players arrive in the village, they see 3 large pieces of paper on the notice board. One says, monster attacking farms, please help. Another says, a wizard's tower in ruins has been discovered. Who wants to investigate? A third says, blacksmith's daughter has been kidnapped. Please save her, basically. That's a very blatant way of throwing 3 story hooks at the group. And they might then choose which one to pursue, or they might choose to pursue multiple, or maybe all of them, maybe even at the same time. Who knows? Now, the second way to throw story hooks or introduce story hooks into your games, a way that I often like, because it makes the world seem more real, is rumors. People talking. The player characters might be in a bar, they might be shopping at a blacksmith at the moment, they might just be sitting on the side of a road, and they will hear people talking. They might hear 2 farmers talking about the fact that the blacksmith is depressed because his daughter has been kidnapped. Or they might even realize in the way that the game master acts out the blacksmith that there's something wrong with him. They might ask the blacksmith. If they don't ask the blacksmith, they might have another customer approach them and explain the situation and tell them, please don't misunderstand the blacksmith's intentions. He would definitely like to have make a deal with you, and he's a good guy, but his mind is not in his business at the moment because he's so worried about his daughter. Or maybe they hear things in a tavern. Maybe they hear a wandering minstrel who sings about a specific treasure that's nearby, or the burial tomb of a hero being despoiled, or any other thing that you might think about. Now, the biggest strength of the sandbox, and if you run a sandbox, you have to use it to make the best of your sandbox game, is player choice. A sandbox game has a lot of player choice, or should have a lot of player choice. That's literally what makes it into a sandbox. What player choice means is not just give them choice. Choices also have to have an impact on the gaming world. Ideally, a visible impact. What that means is when they decide which adventures to pursue, which plot hooks they might ignore, and they might ignore plot hooks, so you have to be prepared for that if you're a game master. Don't be too disappointed if you're running a game of in a sandbox game, and don't be too disappointed if some of your story hooks aren't used. And in fact, I always go as far as to tell my players at the start of the game, when we start the campaign, look guys, this is a sandbox campaign, don't feel pressured to pursue every single story hook, because a lot of players think that that's what the game master wants them to do, pursue every single story hook. Anyway, where were we? Oh yes, choices have to have consequences, and choices have to have impact and change the world around them. That makes the world a very dynamic, a very breathing, living thing, and will let the players feel as if they can achieve things. And that will be satisfactory for them. They can change the world. That's what being a hero is all about, isn't it? Changing the world, some way or the other. Now, you also have to be aware of what happens when players ignore quests, which means that every time you prepare a quest, what you should always do is also prepare the consequence, prepare what happens if the players do not take that quest. If the blacksmith daughter is kidnapped and no one wants to help her, no one is out to help her, what happens? Is she saved by another hero who then earns recognition by the villagers and might rise up to become more prominent in the adventurers, might become a rival or a friend or an enemy or anything in between? Maybe she's killed by the monsters. The blacksmith is so saddened that he leaves the village. With the blacksmith departure, the village starts falling into disrepair. There's fewer customers coming in. The bar closes down, and then people start moving away, and so on and so on. The whole village is changed. Or maybe the blacksmith's daughter is forced to tell the creatures some sort of secret. Maybe the blacksmith has a secret stash of riches. Maybe there is some sort of weakness in the defenses of the village that the blacksmith's daughter knows about, and now the bandits or the monsters or whoever abducted her is actually coming for the village. It spawns a new quest, and then when the players ignore that one, if they ignore that one, what happens to the village? Maybe it is destroyed, or maybe the monsters are beaten off. Maybe a hero rises from that fight, or maybe the villagers gain a treasure or something which can change the village himself. Not all consequences have to be bad. sometimes when player characters ignore a quest, that doesn't mean the evil guys always win. Other NPCs are there to foil their plans. Or maybe there are other NPCs there to foil their plans. I, in my games, always have the philosophy that the player characters, while they are the focus of the story, obviously, they are not the only heroes in this world. And there are other NPCs that rise and fall according to their own deeds and also to the deeds of the player characters. Now, a long sandbox game can become very complex, and it can have a lot of replayability, because player characters make choices, and then they make more choices, and then those choices influence other choices. Those choices influence the plans of NPCs, the plans of factions, and with that, a whole network of choices is created, and the campaign can shift dramatically. It can change extremely with this massive amount of choices just pushing and rubbing against each other. And with that in mind, the same sandbox game can be played by the game master with a different group, not much later, or even at the same time. I have personally done this before, having two groups play parallel in the same campaign, in parallel universes basically, and the outcome might be completely different. You could even use the same group of players, make them roll new characters, and start the whole sandbox campaign from the start. A lot of people do it with computer games if there's enough options and different variables, different endings. So why not do it in role-playing games? One last thing I have to say about sandbox games. As a game master, be prepared to put in a lot of work. Prepare the world well. Always know what the NPCs are up to. Always have a couple story hooks in the backhand. And always know the motivations of the NPCs. And in that way, you will be much easier able to improvise. You will be able to react to players' decisions. And after a while, if you have done it long enough, the world will actually start living in your own mind. And I have experienced this before. It is a very weird feeling, but one that I think every game master should experience at least once in his career, when you have this living world in the back of your head, and you already instinctively know what will happen, what the next 3 or 4 quests that pop up will be, because having all the NPCs, their motivations, their plans, and all the past decisions that the player characters made in your head, you know that this Quest A has to happen. That's the only logical conclusion from all of this. And then if Quest A fails, Quest B and C pop up instinctively. You know that. It's a very interesting feeling. Now, while creating a world, I will put a link to that book underneath the video. I can tell you there's one book that stands above any other role-playing book I have ever read or heard of when it comes to sandbox and preparations. Now, that book is a book for Warhammer Fantasy role-playing game 2nd edition, and the book is called Renegade Crowns. What Renegade's Crowns is, it's basically a source book for a place called the Border Princes in the Warhammer world. The Border Princes are this area that's filled with small villages and towns, and a lot of monsters competing with those villages and towns, and there is no central authority. Instead, the authority is always just the guy with the biggest sword, or the guy with the strongest magic. There is dozens, if not hundreds, of border princes, small rulers that you might just rule one village or a town and a couple villages. They usually fight with each other all the time, and there is a very quick turnover. Someone might be in power, some, say, robber who proclaims himself Baron might be in power for 2 months, then he's assassinated, then a knight rides in and says, oh, now me and my mercenary company are the rulers here, and call me God of all kings, or whatever. Basically, it is a very complex, very quickly changed, but very small scale area of the Warhammer world, and I ran several campaigns in it and I enjoyed it. And the Renegade Crowns book gives you the ability to create your own area of the Border Princes. And how it does that, it gives you a lot of random tables to roll on, and while I personally don't like random tables much, this book is amazing. It gives you so much inspiration. It lets you roll what type of terrain is in your on your map. It lets you roll what kind of settlements there are, how many are there, what are their specialities, what are the dangers they face. It lets you roll old ruins, what is hiding in these ruins, is there a danger coming from them, is there some sort of treasure in there, how old are the ruins, what kind of civilization has left them behind. Just by rolling those ruins, you already have a vague idea of the history of the border princes, of your specific border princedom. If there's a ruin that's 500 years old and of specific origin, then another different origin that's 300 years old, you can say, okay, this civilization must have erected some sort of fortress here, and then they ended. How did they end? And then the other civilization came in, and basically it lets you create a history. Then it lets you roll some of my favorite tables that determine the personality of the current ruler. Is he a knight? Is he a wizard? Is he a priest? Is he a outlaw that just managed to somehow acquire a crown in the widest sense of the word? What is his personality? Is he a thug just beating people up? Is he actually beloved by the people? What dirty secrets does he have? What is his relationship with the other neighboring rulers? If you are looking for a book to teach you how to create sandbox games, to inspire you what a sandbox game can be, pick up Renegade Crowns. If you can find the PDF, if you can find the hardcover, even better. It's a bit hard to find now because Warhammer 2nd Edition is out of print for a while. But I heavily recommend it to anyone who ever wants to run anything even remotely connected to sandbox games. Now, one other thing to say, this goes into world building, and we'll do another GM Musing session regarding world building, so I don't want to get into it too much. But when you're doing your sandbox, when you're doing world building, follow this following rule: create a powder keg. There should be tension in your game world, and tension rubbing against each other, the plans that the different factions have. When they create sparks, and when you have all this powder lying around, everything will erupt. Some massive conflict might happen. Or the conflict might be small scale. Maybe your sandbox is just 2 villages, and the powder keg is just them starting a feud, a few families fighting each other. The scale is irrelevant, but the principle remains the same. And try to make your players understand that there are tensions, and that they should try to understand the tensions. And when they understand that there is a powder keg, your campaign will take a very interesting turn. I can promise you that. Now, there is a few last things to say. Railroads and sandboxes, they both have their values, they both have their flaws. But however, both extremes are bad. You should never go extreme sandbox, and you should never go extreme railroad. I have found that often players want the illusion of a sandbox, but at the same time they want to have a game master hiding behind the scenes, so to speak, and subtly nudging them towards the interesting stuff. Also, sandbox and railroad are, as I said at the start of the video, not mutually exclusive. Combine them. You can drop railroads into your sandbox, or you can put sandboxes into your railroad. Now, a railroad has stops, right? The different scenes. We have scene A, B, C, D, E. A is the first stop, the central station of the train, so to speak, and D, or whatever, is the last one. That's the final destination. So that doesn't mean you can't make stop B or stop C into a small sandbox. Let your players get off the train for a bit, let them stretch their legs before they jump up onto the train again. And when they get to the final destination, to the conclusion, to the climax, to the final battle, I guarantee you they will be less stiff, and they will be more interested, and they will think back onto this train trip with greater joy. So you can play Sand Road, or you can play Railbox, and there is nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, that is probably the best way to do it. Please let me know what kind of experiences you had with Railroad and Sandbox games, and what kind of game you prefer and why. Don't forget to hit the like button of this video if you liked it. If you're looking for more GM musings and other content, please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you have any other GM or RPG related topic that you'd like to hear me talk about, please let me know in the comments. And yes, as always, I thank you guys for watching. I wish you good luck in your own games, and I will see you on the internet.